Hi everyone, and welcome to another installment in our Halo implementation series. Again with me today, I have my favorite person at Halo, Mr. Halo himself. Today we're going to talk, and I see you nodding.
I'm getting too used to it. Yeah, I'm getting too used to it now.
I know Morgan loves it when I say that about him. So today we're going to talk about the ticket approval process in Halo. How to use it, when to use it, what it is and all that kind of stuff, like we've done with all of these other videos. So once again, Morgan, thank you so much for doing these with me. I really appreciate it. And I really appreciate kind of, Halo letting us do these and letting me borrow you for these videos. Really do appreciate it. So thank you for being with us. And yeah.
Always a pleasure. It really is.
Excellent. So do you want to share out your screen and kind of go through this and let's look at how we do this ticket approval process.
Yeah, absolutely. So approval processes tends to be something that is not a must-have from day one. If you're if you're looking for a real baseline, then you're probably looking for incident service request management, some basic CRM and project management functionality, billing, perhaps self-service portal. However, approval processes is something that is often the start of phase 2 of an implementation. So you're familiar with your ticket types and actions and workflows and how to drive that ticket towards resolution. But we want to take it to the next step, right? We want to incorporate some approvals, perhaps to the key contact, an end customer, or an internal approval process for some, permission changes or something like that. So I thought we'll just look at the configuration of approval processes today. We'll create a basic approval process, see how they're triggered, and then perhaps come back in a later session and have a look at how we can actually sort of contextualize our approval processes by incorporating that into a workflow that's triggered by a request being raised from the self-service portal, and start to have a look at the whole start to end process of that kind of journey of a ticket. So anyway, approval processes. Fundamentally, what we're doing is we are changing the status of our ticket, and we're notifying relevant stakeholders where those, or approvers, should I say, where those approvers can make a decision on whatever it is that is being requested, approve or reject. So the configuration of our approval processes is, as it always is, in our configuration panel. And we go into our ticket module, and we'll see the first optional feature that we have on the far left is our approval processes. Now, when we click in here, firstly, we're provided with some miscellaneous information regarding approvals in general. So these are our sort of global approval settings. And then at the top, we have those 3 buttons where we can set up processes, namely create the approval processes from scratch, create approval process rules, allowing us to establish who makes an approval based on some given criteria. And then finally, we have our change by spores where we can set up cabs for approval. So let's start off just by creating a basic approval process. So we'll go into our setup processes, and we can actually have as many approvals in the system as are needed. So you might have different approvals for different events occurring within Halo, different types of requests that are being raised. So we can handle all of that via separate approval processes. Each process itself is multi-step. So you can have one approval, but that one approval might have an initial peer review approval. And then if peer review is all good, then we can go to a main cab for, primary consideration and scheduling and implementation and all of that stuff.
So yeah, so you may have like a technical sign off and a finance sign off, right? So from a technical perspective, it might be that, whatever it is that we're going to install, technically that's going to work and blah, 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 blah. And now we need to get some kind of financial approval on that. So we can have, and I guess at that point, we can then send that over to a different cab, or we could have it as part of the same approval process. Maybe you need to have technical and the finance side sign off at the same time before it goes to the next stage up.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So when we're setting our approvals up, when we're adding steps to our approval process, let's just collapse these so we can break this down a little bit. So, of course, we have first and foremost our details, establishing our sequence. Our sequence here is where in the step or which step is this process, right? So we can reorder our approvals to have those steps based on the sequence that they're set. If it's just a single step process, you don't need to worry about that. Of course, you do need to give it a name. I could type it. You get the point. But below that, you have your approver section. So who is actually approving at this point, at this step in our approval process? Now, that can be anything from a specific agent to a fixed cab. We'll see in a moment how those are configured and constructed. A fixed user. We could have that based on the user's manager or second level manager in Active Directory, or we could even have that based on approval process rules specific to this approval. So we might want to come down here and we might want to have that based on approval process rules. At which point I have this table of contents where I can add my rules in, and just like our ticket rules, we have a criteria section and an outcome section where the criteria may be the change type, and if our change type is an emergency change, we can actually automatically approve at this point. So you'll see a pretty vast list of approval options in here. So I'd like to thank our sister company, Halo ITSM, for implementing those features. These are, some of these have been driven more from the ITSM space. Unfortunately, as Halo ITSM and Halo PSA use the same code base, we've been fortunate enough to inherit some of that functionality. So you'll see an extensive list of types of approvers in here. I'm not going to go through every single one, but it is incredibly flexible. I will say that much.
Yeah, and I think it's certainly on the customers I'm implementing, a few of them are going through this kind of whole approval process. I think a lot of the MSPs, certainly the smaller ones, may or may not do this. It depends upon the type of approval. Certainly if you had a customer that like we said, needed to sign off some kind of financial you have some kind of financial sign off before you went ahead and purchased whatever it was, then I guess you could get your customers to sign that off. But most of the time I'm seeing that a lot of MSPs I'm talking to are not necessarily using the approval process in their everyday business.
Yeah, I've had the same experience, I suppose. It's a mixed bag. It's not fundamental. I don't think I've worked with an MSP that hasn't incorporated billing into Halo PSA at some point. It is fundamental. However, the approvals are not quite as fundamental. However, sort of on the flip side of that, it is something that I think if I was an MSP, I would be bringing into Halo or into my PSA if I could, because it's that extra level of safeguarding, right? If you're getting customer approval for these changes, especially if you're purchasing something for the customer, or if you're implementing some technology into the customer's network, you're going to want to make sure that there's some level of audit trail, some sign off on the customer side there, or even internally, to make sure that first line are doing things, ordering things that they shouldn't be ordering. We can put approval processes in there such that senior management can actually oversee some of those requests that the first line are making. So
Sure.
it's a good mechanism to safeguard yourself, you know, in the eventuality of needing to call upon that.
Yeah, and I agree. I think, you know, it, like you said, it's a good audit trail to have that, you know, when there's a comeback at some point 6 months later saying, well, I didn't ask you to buy that particular device, or, you know, we didn't approve that. You can come back here and say, well, you know, here we have the proof of that, that you did ask for this, or you did, you know, approve for this to be installed and things like that. So
yeah. Or if it's you know, if you're giving someone in the business, if you're giving a customer's end user admin privileges, and later on down the line something goes wrong and that person that has those admin privileges to have deleted or changed something they shouldn't have done, you can always come back and say, well, you know, we asked the CTO at your company to sign this off, and we've got an approval here stating from them that we were good to make that change. So yeah, it's all about that proper audit trail and best practices.
yeah, absolutely. And I said earlier on, and a lot of MSPs don't use this, and I agree with you. I really think it's something that which is why, you know, why I wanted to cover it on the series, because I do think it is something that that people should be looking at and should be saying, you know, let's go through some kind of approval process, either internally or you know, with our end user customers, so that we're covering our backside, so to speak. If, you know, if anything went wrong in anything that we did, we've got the cover here. So
yeah, exactly. It's you know, it's a step at the start of this implementation series. I mentioned the concept of garbage in, garbage out, where, you know, if you're not putting the proper information into Halo PSA, then it's going to be very difficult, if not impossible, to extract meaningful information back out of the system. Well, this touches on a similar concept where it's garbage in, garbage out, but we're not talking about data, we're talking about processes, right? If you don't put proper processes into the system via your workflows, via your approvals, then you're never going to be able to really follow those proper, you know, industry standard guidelines. So this is, in a similar fashion to our workflows, a way of helping you, the MSP, do things the proper official industry standard way of doing them. So yeah, cool. So yeah, as I mentioned, we have a vast list of different types of approvers within our step. Now, below that, we have the option to send emails to approvers. So approvers don't have to approve via email. They can head to the self-service portal where we can add an approval section in. So people, particularly end users via the self-service portal, can approve or reject these requests. For agents, there is my approvals module where we can see the list of approvals that this particular agent has at a given point, where they can approve or reject. However, if you are sending an approval email, the email that will be sent, we go back into our approval configuration. Let's just go into this one. The email that will be sent, or more specifically, the email template that will be sent, is established here. Now, by default, we have our approval message email template, which we can find in configuration email templates under approval message. And out of the box, this is what we have, fairly generic. But the important bit of functionality is these two icons. And behind these two icons, we have $accept link and $reject link. Now, those two variables, $accept link and $reject link, are going to be sort of translated into URLs that you can navigate to approve or reject the request in question. So you don't need to use these icons, but it's important to make sure that you at least include those variables either behind an image or directly onto your email template.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think I've seen that before as well. People, excuse me, people adjust that email putting icons on there, not realizing that there's actually stuff behind those. So if you are going to adjust any of these templates or mess around with them, just look behind any of the stuff that's there already, if there's any graphics or images or anything, and make sure there's no code behind that, like Morgan showed.
Yeah. So below our email section of our approval process configuration is our outcome section. So this is where we can establish the status of the ticket in question based on the outcome of the approval. So we've got our status while we're awaiting approval, status if approval not needed, perhaps it's been auto approved, status if the approval has been accepted and if it's been rejected. And then we've got our status if the start date on the ticket has been reached or exceeded, and the approval hasn't yet been made. So this is quite handy for those scheduled changes that you might have in place. So you've got a scheduled server upgrade for a couple of weeks' time. It needs to go to approval for the technical team to make sure that everything's backed up. The approval has been made, but that scheduled maintenance date is here now. So what do we do? So we can have the status of the ticket say, planning date reached or something like that.
Yeah.
Cool.
Thanks.
And then finally, we have our sort of outcome notifications. So do we want to let the end user on the ticket and or the agent assigned to the ticket know the outcome of the approval? So, if it is an internal approval, you might not want to let the end user know, but you might want to let the assigned agent know so they can then pass that message on to the end user, or you can have your end user also be informed of the outcome. So
yeah, makes sense.
Cool. And yeah, as a first pass, that's sort of approval processes in a nutshell. That's how we configure them. The next point to consider is, well, how do we actually trigger them? So we've set our process up. We've got our example service request process here. But how do we actually initiate this approval? And that can be done via two main mechanisms. So firstly, within our ticket type configuration, via the defaults tab, we have this start an approval process option. Now, this means that whenever a ticket of this type is going to be logged, we are going to immediately initiate our example service request approval process. So we can have that based on a ticket being logged, just the very nature of it being created will trigger that approval. Again, think in the back of your mind about an admin rights request logged by the self-service portal. As soon as that comes in, you're going to want the key contact at the customer in question to get an email saying, Joe Bloggs has just logged this admin rights request. Is this something that you actually want to go forward with, or are they doing this behind your back or something like that?
Yeah, sure.
So you can have that logged, you can have that approval process triggered just for as soon as the ticket's been logged, or within our action configuration via the details tab, we have this start an approval process option. So you might have a request approval action that triggers that approval. So a ticket comes in, but not until that request approval action has been performed does that approval process get triggered. So those are the two main ways that you would sort of go about initiating the approval.
Yeah, absolutely. And by default, that approval process is set to no on both the ticket type and on the action.
Good question.
Yeah.
But it is these days, older trial configurations actually had every type of request by default have the approval process triggered. So this is something that, again, something that I saw in my days of onboarding and implementations. The trial config has all of these different requests automatically logging this approval process, which is pretty annoying, to be honest. You're playing about with Halo, you're going to log a desktop request and you get this, approval screen pop up, and you have no idea what's going on. this is old configuration. This has since been removed. I think that there is a change request workflow that's recently been implemented that will be triggered when a change request is raised, but not when a service request or network request or desktop request has been created. So yeah, it depends on the version of the trial that you've got. Older configurations might have this in by default. More recent ones will not.
Yeah. Okay, sounds good.
Cool. Perhaps just got a couple more minutes just to have a look at what the ticket looks like when we're in the midst of an approval.
Yeah, I think that would be good. I think it would be good to show kind of let's actually do this. Let's go through this whole flow of what happens when this gets approved, when it gets rejected, whatever. Yeah.
So
you have the same issue I have today with the typing.
yeah, I have it every day, to be honest. You'd think that after years of typing, I'd actually be good at it, but no, not yet.
Exactly.
Okay, so I've gone to log this service request and I get this pop-up before I actually go to log the request. So why is that? Well, let's backtrack through the configuration, right? So let's go to our ticket type. Let's go to our defaults tab for the service request. We can see that's logging, or that's initiating the example service request approval process. Now let's go and take a look at that approval process. So we can see in our example service request process, we have one step, and that step is going to be approved by a CAB, cost center approval. Well, let's go and take a look at that CAB. So we'll take a step back. Config tickets, approval processes, go to change advice boards, go to cost center approval. And we can see in here, there's two members of our CAB. One member type is agent and one member type is user. So our change advice boards can be a combination of agents, users, or even fixed email addresses. So those CABs are very flexible as well. And from that, we have the CAB pop up with those users, and I can select who in that CAB I want to be approving this request. Cool. So let's save that. So now the tickets come in. We can see the current status is awaiting approval. And down here below, we actually have our approval process information. Now, I have logged the ticket. So as an approver, I've actually automatically approved that because, by virtue of logging it, I am requesting it. And it's also, we have our user here that has not yet made our approval. As an administrator, I have the ability to come in and mark an approval on behalf of another individual.
Okay.
And we'll see now both of our CAB members have approved. The status of our ticket has moved to approved. And we'll see in a later session how we can start tying this into our workflows such that, let's think about a standard change process. You might have a scheduling, an implementation, a documentation phase of that change. But that's not relevant until the change itself has been approved. So we can actually have our workflow actions, our buttons along the top here, present or not, based on the outcome of an approval process. So yeah, that's something that we'll see in an upcoming session.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be the next session we're going to do. Just one of the things that does come up a lot on this, and it'd be good to get your take on this, is both users have or both people in the CAB have approved. So both Morgan and user have approved. So if one of you rejects it, so if the user says, yeah, no, I don't want this to happen, and I'm going to mark it as rejected, then I'm assuming at that point the ticket becomes rejected rather than approved until that person then goes back and approves it.
Yeah, great question. So when we're talking about change advice boards, when we're configuring our change advice boards, we have the option to specify that all members must approve, which means exactly what it says with this option checked.
Yep.
We're not going to mark that as approved until everyone in the cab has approved. Or we don't need everyone in the cab to approve, at which point we can set thresholds for approval and rejection. So here, what I could do is I could add you in, Chris. And I could say, so we've now got this cab composed of 3 individuals. And we're saying that if any 2 of those 3 individuals approve this, then it's approved. But if any one of the 3 rejects it, then we're rejecting it. Yeah, exactly. So to answer your question, yes, that is configurable, and that is based on the configuration options within the change advice board itself.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and that's exactly how how it works in other PSA tools as well. It's either you can either have one person approve it, or or multiple people approve, or you can say it won't be approved until every single person has marked it as approved. So somebody can come in and mark it as unapproved for now, and then go away and think about it and come back and run some figures or whatever, and then come back and go, yeah, actually now I've had a meeting and I've had some discussions, and now actually I am approving it, so I'm going to come back and approve it, and then it gets approved. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Cool.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, so I think that approval process is really good in terms of being able to decide who's going to approve the ticket, and adding it as a a step within the ticket. So if you use that as a either from the ticket itself and say, this ticket is always going to need approval, this kind of ticket, or add it as an action where you can just request the approval for that particular action if you need to.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's a useful tool to have by your side to make sure that these changes that you're making are properly audited. There's a lot of power, and with power comes responsibility in the MSP's hands, and so you want to make sure that the proper process is followed whenever you have the ability to follow it, and this is yet another option within Halo that allows you to align your processes with the industry standards, as I mentioned.
Okay. Brilliant. Cool. Yeah, I mean that's really good. I think that's really helped, and that'll certainly help a lot of people as they're kind of implementing the tool to understand, what is the approval process, when do we use it, how do we use it. So yeah, I think that was going really well. So
yeah, because it's also a lot of people see it. It's not a very well documented part of Halo PSA. Soon to be changed, but yeah, at the minute it's not very well documented. So it's like, well, I don't really know how this works. I can't find any documentation for it, so I'm going to leave it. So hopefully this is going to help people better understand the functionality and help them put it into their own instances of Halo.
Yeah, absolutely. So as always, thank you very much. And if anyone has any questions, feel free to leave a comment below. Either I'll be able to help you through this, or we can get you in touch with somebody at Halo that can kind of go through this with you. So as always, Morgan, really appreciate your time, really appreciate that you're spending the time with me to go through these, and you explain it a lot better than I can. So it's really good to have you doing these with us.
Yeah, always happy to jump on these. Yeah, thank you, Chris, and thanks everyone for watching.
Yep, thanks for watching. See you on the next one. Cheers.
Cheers, guys. Bye.